This is the In Focus podcast from The Hindu.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the In Focus podcast. I'm your host, Sampath. After more than 15 months of conflict and devastation, there is finally a ceasefire agreement in Gaza, or so it seems. This ceasefire deal will come into force on January 19th, Sunday. And this agreement, brokered by Egypt, Qatar, and American officials, will unfold over 3 phases. And in phase 1, it would involve Hamas releasing 32 or 33 Israeli captives in exchange for Israel releasing thousands of Palestinian prisoners and also allowing a surge in humanitarian aid into Gaza. So a ceasefire that was elusive all through 2024 suddenly clicks into place a few days before the Trump inauguration. How did this happen? And does the credit for this go to Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, as some are suggesting, or is it due to the efforts put in by Biden officials as well? What does this ceasefire agreement mean for Israel and for Netanyahu domestically? And will this ceasefire last, or will the bombings resume once again once the phase 1 of this deal is done? In this episode of In Focus, we take a close look at this deal and what it means for the various stakeholders. And joining us is Johny, the Hindu's International Affairs Editor. Stanley, welcome back to In Focus.
Thanks, Sampath. Happy to be back.
Great. So I was just wondering, Stanley, if you can just share your thoughts on how did this plan come to get accepted by the Israeli regime? How did Netanyahu accept a plan which has been in sort of on the plate since May 2024? All these months he has walked away from it, and suddenly he is he's going to okay it now. So can you take us through what went down in the past few days? There's been talk of Steve Witkoff sort of parachuting into it and forcing this deal come through. So what exactly happened over the last week or so?
Yeah, as you mentioned, this is the same deal that was offered in May. It hasn't. The fine details of the deal haven't changed because this is a 3-phase deal, and in the first phase, 33 hostages will be released, and Israel will have to release some 1,300 Palestinian security prisoners. And then Israel is also asked to withdraw from parts of Gaza, which means Israel will withdraw from from the corridor which is separating southern Gaza with the center, but Israel will retain some forces in the Philadelphia corridor, etc., etc. This is basically the May offer. But then I think a couple of things happened. One is that, Israel, I think there is now Israeli security leadership has concluded that Hamas cannot be destroyed. This was the original objective, at least the original stated objective. Israel had 2 stated objectives. One, to destroy Hamas. 2, secure the release of hostages. After 15 months of fighting, of bombing Gaza, Israel hasn't achieved either of the 2. But yes, Gaza has been destroyed. Some 46,000 people were killed. Over 100,000 people were injured. Almost the entire population of Gaza has been displaced, and the killing continues. Israel can continue to kill Palestinians. That's true.
There was a big number of Gazans killed in bombing, I think, after the ceasefire deal was announced, right? I think yesterday some 100 people were killed.
Yeah. Exactly. So Israel can continue to kill Palestinians, but the question is whether the killing would help Israel destroy Hamas. Interestingly, when Tony Blinken was there a few days ago, he made an interesting observation. He said, we means the Americans, we assess that Hamas has already displaced for the number of fighters it lost. It has already recruited as many fighters it lost, which means Hamas' fighting force remains intact despite the losses it suffered to its military infrastructure. And Hamas has also reinvented itself as an insurgency. For example, the night before the initial deal was announced, 5 Israeli soldiers were killed in Gaza. We are talking about a small territory of land which has been bombed by the Israelis for 15 months. So Hamas has reinvented itself as an insurgency, and it has basically recruited as many fighters it lost. So it remains a fighting force. That is one thing. But that's not the only thing. And then secondly, you see, if you look at the regional developments from Israel's point of view, Israel thinks that it has made itself it has placed itself in a better position. For example, Hezbollah has taken some military setback. The Syrian regime has fallen, which I think is Israel's most important strategic gain, because the Syrian government has fallen, which will further weaken Iran, which will further weaken Hezbollah. So Israel thinks that it is in a better position today than it was in May. And then the third factor could be Trump's return to the White House, because all said and done, Trump is a very highly pro-Israel president. There is no doubt about it. That's what his first term tells us. He is the one who moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He is the one who tore apart the Iranian nuclear deal, etc., etc. But at the same time, Trump had also said that he wanted a deal before he takes office. So he had said this: all hell will break loose if there is no deal. And his envoy, Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, had also traveled to the region, met the officials on both sides, and then he apparently talked to Netanyahu. And according to Times of Israel, which quoted Arab officials, Trump's Middle East envoy achieved in a single sit-in with Netanyahu what Biden tried to do in the whole year. So he apparently played a role in persuading Netanyahu to accept the ceasefire. So I think all these factors, that Israel's own conviction that Hamas cannot be destroyed, or the hostages cannot be rescued through military operation, that is one thing. I think that is a very important factor. And secondly, the changes in the regional dynamics, which Israel think has made its position, its larger West Asian position, stronger. And then the third factor is the return of the Trump to the White House. Trump wants a peace deal, and Israel agreed to make some concessions, at least for now, which doesn't mean that you are going to have lasting peace. But still, at least for now, at least for the initial exchange of the refugees as well as the prisoners, Israel has also come around.
Right. So what explains this entire urgency in terms of getting this deal through before this inauguration? Is it just to score some kind of political points? Like, how does it help Trump in any way, given that he's actually, I mean, he's somebody who is more pro-Israel than Biden, or he's on one side.
That's correct.
But at the same
That's,
time, he's
I mean,
pushing Israel to make compromises and concessions. So how does these two things tally?
so whether he is, I mean, he is definitely pro-Israel. Biden was also definitely pro-Israel. Who's more pro? We can wait and see, because Biden's track record of being the president of the United States and presiding over this kind of attack over Gaza, this is unprecedented. Even Republican presidents in the past had used their leverage over Israel to bring the wars to an end, to at least restrain Israel. And it is surprising to me that Biden did nothing. Okay, he was making statements. He kept sending Tony Blinken to the region. They held a lot of negotiations with Arab officials, Israeli officials, this and that. But at the end of the day, Biden refused to use the leverage he had. He continued to supply the Israelis even when Israel kept killing the Palestinians uh, for 15 months continuously. So that makes Biden one of the most pro-Israel presidents in America's history. That's one thing, in modern history. That's one thing. But definitely, Trump is. Trump is no different. For example, as I said earlier, if you look at Trump's track record, or even if you look at his statements, you look at the statements made by Trump's nominees at the Senate floor. They all said that Israel has the right to fight terror, Hamas has to be destroyed, etc., etc. All very hawkish pro-Israel positions coming from. And now compare that with the position he has taken here, at least when it comes to the peace deal. I think there are two things. One, Trump wants to begin with a peace agreement in West Asia, because this has been, one of the most pressing conflicts, over the last 15 months, and a lot of people have been killed. And Trump had promised during the campaign that he would bring peace. He said that he would make peace. He would bring peace to Gaza. He would bring peace to Ukraine. He had made this promise during the campaign. So he wanted to begin on a positive note. That could be one explanation. And then secondly, if you look at Trump's approach to the region, see, the Trump administration is not going to like Iran, definitely not. You look at Marco Rubio's speech at Senate. He clearly said that the Iranian regime at its weakest point. He said that the United States has to continue to support the people of Iran, quote unquote, not the regime of Iran. So he's not going to like Iran, and Trump is likely to. My expectation is that Trump is likely to impose more sanctions on Iran, try to isolate Iran further. But at the same time, I don't think that Trump wants an all-out war in the region. Trump doesn't want an all-out war even between Iran and Israel, which could draw the United States in, because Trump also has a base. Basically, this is not because of any humanitarian consideration, but the Trump base is built on its opposition towards America's forever wars, quote unquote. You look at Tulsi Gabbard, who is the director of the National Intelligence. You look at Trump's own vice president, who has been a very strong critic of America's military interventions in West Asia. So definitely, I think at least at this point of time, Trump doesn't want to get drawn into another major conflict in the region. So as long as the Gaza conflict continues, there is clearly a possibility of this war, spilling over into a larger conflict. We saw that in 2024. And there is also a third factor. Yes, there is a ceasefire in Israel's northern border with Hezbollah, but the Houthis continue to attack Israel. The Houthis continue to attack Israel. The Houthis continue to target ships in the Red Sea. Biden started his Operation Prosperity Guardian, promising to destroy the Houthi missile bases. And America, Britain, and France, they continue to carry out multiple attacks in Yemen. So did the Israelis, but the Houthis still target ships going through the Red Sea, which has actually, pumped up freight charges, insurance costs, which has an inflationary impact on the United States and Western economies in general. So the Houthis will stop attacking ships in the Red Sea if there is a ceasefire in Gaza. So this is also an added advantage for Trump. So if you look at
Is there
the
also another
rational.
dimension, Stanley? When one of the, admittedly, it seems pretty far out, but I just want to sort of bring it in because there are people talking about it, which is that given that Trump is no humanitarian, and you did mention that he doesn't want the U.S. dragged into some kind of a forever war situation, and given that Israel has got exactly what it would like with regard to Syria, do you think this is
Yeah.
part of a larger kind of a deal, maybe with Russia and Putin? Because Russia certainly must have been instrumental in what happened with the Assad regime, him getting flown out of there at the right time. And in exchange, maybe they will get peace in Ukraine as well, because here Israel and the US are getting what they want, and there probably Putin could get some kind of a deal. Is this some kind of a larger interlocking deal that is happening? Or do you think it's too far fetched?
We don't know. I have seen this theory when Assad fell. This theory was being circulated that it could be part of some kind of a deal between the Americans and the Russians. The Russians can keep Ukraine, the Americans can do whatever they want to do in West Asia. Uh, I mean, it could be possible, but we don't know. But what we know is that the fall of Assad is a clear setback for the Russians as well. Even if Russia had accepted this as a deal, they must have done it out of despair. Even if they had done it, that's what I'm saying. I don't know whether it was a deal, because Syria was important for the Russians. Syria, Syria hosts Russia's Mediterranean naval base in Tartus and also one air base. So this naval base was critical.
They still have their air base and naval base.
They continue to do that, but they had moved some military infrastructure from Syria to, from Syria to Libya. But still, yeah, they continue to operate the base. They say that they will hold negotiations with the new Syrian regime. But I'm saying that still, when Assad was there, the Soviets, the relationship with the Assads that actually go back to the Soviets. The Russians had long-lasting relationship with them, and Syria was kind of a Russian fief throughout. Now, even if they manage to maintain, even if they manage to cut a deal to retain their presence in the Mediterranean Sea, which also we have to wait and see, there is a lot of uncertainty about what is going to happen in Syria. And now in Syria, the most powerful country is Turkey. And Russia had a very touchy relationship with Turkey. My understanding was that basically Erdogan took Putin for a ride in Syria. Putin, there was a chance for Putin to actually help the Syrian government take over Idlib. At that time, Erdogan entered into a deal with the Russians, and they froze the conflict. And when the conflict was frozen, when Assad was prevented from attacking Idlib, what Erdogan did was to deepen Turkey's influence in Idlib by supporting the HTS, which was formerly Al Qaeda. And I think everybody was taken by surprise when HTS launched the attack. Interestingly, HDF launched the attack on November 27th, the day Hezbollah and Israel entered into the agreement, because HTS realized that this was the time to strike Syria. Hezbollah is weak. Israel has repeatedly bombed the Syrian troops, so Syrian troops are weak. So HDS thought that this is the moment, and they made the move. And within 4 days, they took over Aleppo. And that probably led to the Russians and the Iranians conclude that this time the Assad regime is beyond redemption. So they didn't have nothing much to do. Whether it is part of a deal or not, we don't know. But definitely what happened in Syria was a clear setback for both the Russians and the Iranians. And Israel benefited. And one point you mentioned was absolutely spot on, because the fall of the government in Syria, I think, led to the Israelis thinking that their position in West Asia has become stronger. Yes, they may have to deal with a more powerful Turkey tomorrow. That is a problem that might arise in the future. But if we talk about the present, Israel wanted to destroy Hezbollah, they could not destroy Hezbollah. Israel wanted to destroy Hamas, they could not destroy Hamas. But by bringing down the Assad regime, or the fall of the Assad regime, actually allowed Israel to weaken both Hezbollah and Iran further.
Right. I
That
mean,
is a
there is no
major,
doubt.
that's a tectonic
Yes.
shift.
Right. I mean, of course, there is no doubt that Israel's position in this geopolitical chessboard is definitely stronger with
After the
Hezbollah
fall of Assad.
substantial. Yeah, after the fall of Assad, weakening of Hezbollah, the various assassinations of Hamas leaders, and of course the flattening of Gaza too. But coming back to the actual ceasefire deal, Stanley, when we know that it's going to sort of unfold in three phases. You spoke briefly about phase one. What exactly is envisioned for phase two and phase three? Not many are actually talking about phase two and phase three. Are they really going to be something which will be implemented, or is it just there for you know for the sake of form? I mean, will actually, can we expect Israel to honor this deal?
It's very difficult. So beyond phase one, nobody is talking about beyond phase one, because nobody has the details about phase two and phase three right now. Only we have a broad sketch about phase two and phase three. Phase one, we know what's going to happen. Israel has to release 1,300 Palestinians. Hamas has to release 33 hostages, and this has to be implemented in 42 days. And Israel should also allow some 600 plus trucks of humanitarian aid into Gaza every day. And Israel has to withdraw its troops from the Netzarim corridor. Netzarim is separating northern Gaza from the south. And Philadelphia is basically separating Rafah from the Egyptian border. So as of now, Israel has troops in Netzarim and Philadelphia. So if Israel withdraws from Netzarim, that means people in Gaza south, there roughly 1.5 million people are there in Gaza south. They have been crammed into southern refugee camps. So if Israel withdraws from Netzarim, these people can actually move towards northern and central Gaza, towards Han Yunis and Gaza City. So this is a major demand by Hamas, which Israel has, at least on paper, Israel has agreed. But Israeli troops will remain in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is on the Rafah. It's in the south on the Rafah corridor. So which means Israel will continue to monitor the Rafah crossing, the border between Gaza and Egypt. That's what Israel thinks Hamas is basically smuggling in weapons and fighters through this corridor. That's what the Israelis are saying. So they will remain in Philadelphia and some buffer. This is phase one. And in phase two, Israel and Hamas have to declare an end to permanent hostilities in phase two. This is what the document says. The document hasn't released by the Israelis, but several media organizations have already reviewed it. So in phase 2, they have to basically declare an end to permanent hostilities. To declare end to permanent hostilities, that means Hamas has to release more hostages. So let's say at the end of phase 1.
Is this a permanent end to hostilities or an end to permanent hostilities?
So permanent end to hostilities.
Okay,
That's what the second phase 2 says. For example, let's say that if Hamas releases 33 hostages in phase 1, at the end of the successful implementation of phase 1, Hamas will still have 65 hostages, including some of them are alive, and most of them will be dead. Of this 33 they are releasing now, or they are required to release now, most of them are alive. That's what the deal says. So in the second phase, Hamas will still have 65 hostages. And the negotiations for the second phase will begin on the 15th day of the first phase. And then the first phase will be completed in 42 days. And then in the second phase, Hamas will release most of all the hostages that are alive and some of the dead hostages. But then, even at the end of the phase 2, some Israeli troops will remain in Gaza and some hostages will remain in Hamas's hands. And in phase 2, they need to talk about the day after, which means what will happen after the deal is implemented. So this is going to be
and what about phase 3?
Yeah, in phase 2. I'm talking about phase 3. In phase 2, Hamas has to release more hostages and Israel has to release more security prisoners, and both sides should formally declare an end to hostilities, a permanent end to the hostilities.
Is there any in any of these phases, phase 2 or phase 3, is Israel not required to withdraw completely from Gaza?
In phase 2, Israel is not required to completely withdraw. But in phase 3, that's what I'm saying. In phase 3, basically Hamas says that Israel has to withdraw completely from Gaza. So phase 3 is very, very sketchy. It is the details are not in.
And what
So
about the
Hamas
role of
wants
all
this-
these Egyptian and Qatari officials? They are supposed to oversee and ensure that both sides fall in line, etc., etc. Right? I mean,
Yeah, Qatari and Egyptian officials are mediators. They can. I don't think anybody can oversee this. This is
on
one
the
of the major
ground,
drawbacks of this agreement.
there's
On the
nobody on
ground,
the
there is
ground
nobody.
nobody on the ground to make sure that
There
Palestinians.
is nobody. Israel will not let anybody into Gaza, right? Not even journalists. Not even journalists. So nobody is there. The Qatari and Egyptian officials cannot go to Gaza and oversee the agreement. Israel will not let that happen. As of now, Israel is controlling all the checkpoints. But Hamas says that in phase 3, Israel has to withdraw entirely from Gaza. And only then it will release the remaining hostages. That's what Hamas is saying. But here, Israel hasn't committed. Israel hasn't committed to this. Israel's focus is now on phase 1. Because you look at this from Israel's point of view. Imagine that Israel is withdrawing all the troops from Gaza as part of the phase 3 agreement, and the war comes to an end. Hamas would still be there. Israel wanted to destroy Hamas. That did not happen. Now Israel definitely doesn't want to leave Hamas in a ruling position.
What about the impact of this deal on Netanyahu's coalition government, Stanley? I mean, there were these two guys, Smotrich and Ben Giver. I think they were threatening to sort of withdraw from his government. Maybe will it, causing it to lose stability. Like, how is that going to play out?
So Smotrich says that he is opposed to bringing the war to an end, but he did not say he will withdraw his support for the government. I looked at his statement. He said he is opposed to bringing the war to an end. But Ben Gvir on the other side says if the ceasefire agreement goes through, he will quit the government. So even if Ben Gvir, his party quits the government, Netanyahu's government will be a minority government. So whenever there is a no confidence motion, this government could collapse. Or whenever they need to pass a bill, his government could collapse in the future. So yes, this will affect, I mean, if you go by what Ben Gvir has said, this will affect the stability of Netanyahu's government. The Smotrich says he is also opposed to the agreement, but he hasn't threatened to pull back, at least as of now. But what we have to see is, in case, just in case, Ben-Gvir withdraws support, it is also possible that Yair Lapid or Benny Gantz, who are from the opposition ranks, could support this agreement at least until the ceasefire is implemented, which is also possible. They haven't said that this time, but earlier, Yair Lapid had said that his Yesh Atid party would offer support, outside support to the government if the government is serious about peace.
Correct.
So that we have to wait and see how this is going to affect the government. But Ben-Gvir has clearly said that he will quit and leave.
Right. So, regardless of what Ben-Gvir does, I mean, there is no threat to Netanyahu's government, or there's no threat, danger of it falling over this ceasefire deal. In any case, I mean, it's going to survive if it comes to a vote or whatever. He will survive this deal at any rate. Now, one last
If we get
question.
support from the opposition, yes, he will survive.
Right. So, one last question, Stanley, before we wrap up. I mean, this do you think this ceasefire, I mean, as and when it comes into effect, it will hold? I mean, can it serve as a launching pad or maybe a platform for the next stage of bringing regional stability to this place? Where we can actually start talking about Palestinian statehood, putting in place a governance structure so that people who come back to their homes can start living in some form of normalcy, start talking about reconstruction. Is this a too utopian a scenario to talk about just now, or is it something which is on the cards?
I think as long as Netanyahu remains the prime minister, we won't see any constructive positions taken by the Israeli government towards bringing some normalcy to the region, to the Palestine issue. I don't think so. So they might accept a temporary ceasefire, but we don't have clarity whether they will even leave Gaza completely. It is highly possible that the Israelis are going to stay in Philadelphia and in northern Gaza. That's what my understanding is that. And if they stay, if they refuse to leave Gaza, that means Hamas will continue to operate as an insurgency, which means you will find a war of attrition. The ceasefire deal could collapse in phase 2 or phase 3. But yeah, otherwise, if you want some kind of stability, if you want to rebuild Gaza, what has to be done? Everybody knows what has to be done. What has to be done is that Israel has to withdraw its military forces from Gaza and to remove the blockade it has imposed on Gaza. So, under some international mediation, you have to rebuild Gaza and then work towards building a new settlement, because the Palestine issue is now very much at the fore of West Asia's geopolitics. But I don't see that possibility. I don't see it happening anytime soon.
Right. You don't see that kind of a positive development happening anytime soon, as long as Netanyahu is in power. That's a pretty grim prognosis. Thank you so much, Stanley, for your thoughts and insights on this unfolding story. We'll have to hopefully wait and see how this ceasefire deal takes effect. I think Sunday we will come to know. And I think this deal is still awaiting cabinet approval from Israel. Is that right?
That's right. Netanyahu confirmed the agreement, but we are still waiting for the cabinet approval.
Right. Hopefully that will be that's just a mere formality, and for what it's worth, I think there will be some relief for the Palestinians in Gaza for 6 weeks, if not longer. I think that is something to look forward to at any rate. Thank you so much. Once again, pleasure talking to you, Stanley.
Thank you so much.
In Focus will be back soon with analysis of the biggest news issues. In the meantime, you can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and other platforms. Just search for In Focus by The Hindu. We'll see you soon.